as you mentioned, we're pretty much in a nice phase and era of the mural, as you mentioned. We've seen whether in the major cities, as you mentioned, as we just talked about, you've done in the Hartford community. And when you're creating these murals personally, on these large scales, on these buildings, could you briefly talk to us about how that actually comes together, as we've seen so many murals pop off everywhere in our country specifically, and pretty much all over the world? Can you talk to us like how that process starts, how long it takes? I assume it's clearly not graffiti, so I'm sure you got permission for it, as maybe they used to back in the 70s and 80s. But how does that all come together in a large scale?
Right. Well, it has to be orchestrated by someone from the top. And luckily, I have an amazing project manager at CT Murals named Matt Conway. CT Murals started as the passion project underneath the Rise Up Community Group. And the Rise Up Community Group is a 501c nonprofit here in Hartford locally that has huge impact in the community, just like uplifting others through the arts and community co-alignment together. But yeah, he's been immensely incredible, Matt, and his team with CT Murals, really orchestrating things, securing budget, working with local businesses and different cultural councils and coalitions across the state. The different counties across the state have been immensely helpful in generating interest and spreading word and love. And the typical mural takes about 6 to 8 months of preparation before we actually get our feet on the ground and start painting. It's a pretty lengthy process. It's a lot of communication. It's a lot of revisions and insight, and open for criticism. So, but it's immensely rewarding. It's a really cool process, and every project takes on its life of its own. So, yeah.
All right. And after the 6 months of planning, 6 to 8 months, and you go to, we'll use a building as an example. They ask you to create a mural for. How long does that process start? Do you just go over? Do you just go right away? You make your masterpiece? Do you put do you white it out first and then you go, and that takes a various amount of months? Can you walk us through the actual painting process once you get approval and your rights and everything?
Sure. Yeah. So once we have, kind of all the provisions and all the preliminary work on the back end done, we'll put down, a clear coat or some type of, primer, depending on the surface, and, really make it a workable surface, kind of survey the landscape, kind of prep the groundwork. And then we'll start moving either our scaffolding or our scissor lifts or our boom lifts into the area, kind of zone things off, section things off. And the typical mural takes about 2 to 2.5 weeks to paint, more or less. Like the recent 3-story building I did in South Downtown District of Hartford, that took about 2.5 weeks, give or take, all things considered. So it's funny because it's like about 6 to 8 months of preparation, behind the scenes with, allocating funding and doing a lot of business to business contact. And then once you get painting, it's bing, bang, boom. It's 2 weeks.
Look at that. And then after 2 weeks, a nice ceremony, and then forever you make your mark wherever you put that mural. Very fascinating process, I got to tell you. And the stuff you've done in your team deserve a lot of credit for it. And is it cool? Just one last question on this. When you're actually doing,
sure,
the painting of the mural, and whether you're sketching something out or you're painting in the characters being featured, how does it feel? Like those cool moments, you must turn around and say, whoa, look at what I'm doing. Is there any feelings of that happen?
Well, it's funny because throughout the process, there's a lot of little chaotic elements that kind of appear out of nowhere. And you kind of have to learn how to micromanage them and kind of problem solve on the fly. So it's very important to be, modest and humble through the process. You kind of have to swallow your pride and be unafraid to reach out to people within a moment's notice for advice on, certain specificities like that. So I don't know how to really answer your question better than that, but I think my best advice for, any artists getting into murals or people that are just at their early, mid-career artists, really be humble through the process. Take every project as its own, like you've never like you've never experienced it before.